We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining. This is going to be the Secure Technology Alliance's webinar related to dynamic security codes. My name is Jason Boers. I'm going to be the moderator for this session. I'm personally excited about this particular topic, as I know that in our particular industry, as we're always looking for ways to combat fraud, and specifically card not present fraud. And I think today's session is going to be a great educational tool for everybody in the industry. So with that, as we'll go ahead and get moving, Kathy, if you want to go to the next slide, is a little bit about the Secure Technology Alliance. As many of you are probably familiar with the organization, but STA is the leading not-for-profit multi-industry association working to stimulate understanding, adoption, and widespread application of secure solutions. We do participate in a variety of different segments within this field, as some of those you can see there on the right. Our focus really can be captured there on the first bullet point under what we do, but our aim is to bring together stakeholders within the space to effectively collaborate on promoting secure solutions, technology, and addressing industry challenges. We do provide a number of different tools within the industry related to be it either white papers, webinars, a variety of different workshops, facilitate trade shows in an effort to bring forward many of the issues that are related to our industry and things that are important to the group. But a lot of different member benefits that we bring to the table down there on the lower right. If you do have any interest in joining Secure Technology Alliance moving forward, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and we'll be more than happy to help you walk through the membership application deadline. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. Within STAs, we do have a number of different councils focused on specific segments within the industry. We do have a payments council, which you can see here is focused on securing payments and payment applications in the U.S. A lot of the work that you'll hear today focuses within the payments council specifically. There's a variety of different resources that we bring to the table related to not only dynamic security code cards, but also biometric payment cards, a variety of different technologies that support faster and more secure payments within the payments industry. So if you have any questions related to material that STA can bring to the table, please feel free again to reach out to myself or Kathy Medich, and we'd be happy to help you with that. And with that, if you want to go to the next slide, Kathy, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and introduce our panel. It's a very deep panel, individuals that have spent many years within the industry. Starting here on the upper left as we have Francine Dubois. So Francine is currently the VP of Sales and Partnerships at IDEMIA, where she's in charge of indirect sales for North America. She was previously VP of Sales and Partnerships at NID Security, the leader in display card technology, which was acquired by IDEMIA in 2014. Before that, she was VP of Marketing Global Solutions for Hypercom prior to its acquisition by Verifone. And in 2007, she became president and CEO of ID Centrix, which was a startup specialized in ID card technology. She acquired her initial expertise in the payments industry at Obither Smart Cards, where she started in 1998 and left as VP of Marketing Financial Cards and Services. She does have over 30 years of marketing, management, and business development expertise in the card and software industry. So welcome, Francine. Thank you. Next up I'll introduce Cyril Lalo. So Cyril is the founder and CEO of Ellipse, the provider of EMV integrated dynamic card security code technologies. Cyril is a pioneer in the encapsulation of electronics and payment cards and has over 20 patents granted under his name. His innovations led to the development and commercialization of the first dynamic CVV card. So welcome, Cyril. Thank you. Next up we have Oliver Manahan. So Oliver is the Senior Director of Business Development for Infineon Technologies, responsible for partnerships with card vendors, issuers, payment networks, and others. Prior to his current role, Oliver was Vice President of Emerging Payments with MasterCard, where he spent 10 years managing MasterCard's EMV chip, contactless, and transit programs for North America. And prior to that was with Visa for a decade working on emerging payment technologies. Oliver started his career in the information technology field, working with companies such as Mercedes-Benz and Pepsi. Oliver is the co-chair of the Secure Technology Alliance and its Payments Council, and is on the steering committee of the U.S. Payments Forum. So welcome, Oliver. As next up, I'll go ahead and introduce Jerry Glendrow. So Jerry has been with IDEMIA also since 2008, starting as an EMV technical consultant in the early days of the U.S. EMV migration. Currently, he's the subject matter expert for IDEMIA's Dynamic Security Code Solutions. His experience and expertise in the field has been helpful in assisting issuers implement the solution in pilot trials here in the U.S. over the past several years. So welcome, Jerry. And then lastly, as I would like to go ahead and introduce Tom Rapcott. So Tom has over 20 years of experience working in the payments industry. At Visa, in addition to continuing to assist with the rollout of EMV and contactless in the US and globally, Tom is helping to implement new risk products for Visa, including dynamic CVV solutions being implemented today, as well as the sensor on card and terminal biometric products. So welcome, Tom. And with that, as we're going to go ahead and jump on in, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Francine, if you want to go ahead and pick it up from here.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Jason. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. Kathy, let's go to the first slide, please. As everybody knows, 2020 was an incredible year in so many ways. In the world of e-commerce, it basically represented several years of e-commerce growth. We all knew it was growing steadily, and now suddenly things changed dramatically in March a year ago. A year ago, you had approximately 12% of people buying things online on a regular basis. 2 months after the beginning of the pandemic, it multiplied by 3. In May, we were pretty much at 39%. And then in November, it was, times 4, 45%. So that has all kinds of consequences, and we'll go into it a little bit later. But right now, it's still growing, by the way. It hasn't stopped, and it's going to continue to grow. So what did we learn from that, actually? Well, first, and that's good news, and for the digital channels, 79% of those consumers will keep the habits that they developed during the pandemic. And that's not just buying, regular, what they might have been buying before, but, groceries, for instance. That's something that people would have thought, well, it might not stay. It is sticking. There's different, numbers based on the different channels, but it's really interesting. To give another number that's some perspective, 42% of digital transaction in North America, so that's the increase between June 2019 and June 2020, knowing based on the numbers I just shared before that probably the big part of that happened between March and June. And unfortunately, as we all know, that card not present fraud, the rate also increased, and we're talking times 2. So we're not going to go here in the details. There's, fraud is card not present fraud has all kinds of different, frauds in it, but in terms of e-com specifically, that's where the impact is tremendous. So based on that, how did those things happen? So Kathy, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So fraudsters are opportunistic. They suddenly see something new happening and they're going to look, how can I take advantage of that? So typically, for those who might not know that, a lot of the compromises, how do you get data, how new data? It's either you get it through merchants or you have, malware, social engineering, and the result is how do we get those numbers that we can use down the road? So when it comes to merchants, interestingly enough, the brick and mortar, and especially the restaurant business, it's through no fault of their own, but the model in the US is you give your card to somebody who goes away with it and comes back. And unfortunately, there are some unscrupulous, employees. They take a picture front and back, it's on the dark web, and 30 days later, things happen. So unfortunately, that channel was pretty much extinguished. Last year, during periods of time, during shutdowns and lockdowns. So what did they do? The fraudsters said, well, we're going to create fake stores for what people want today. So what did they want? all the things that happened with the pandemic. We're talking masks, we're talking medical supplies, we're talking toilet paper. If you recall, we would even order it from China if we could. I mean, it was really a problem. And unfortunately, they never got anything, but the thieves got their numbers. Then I'm not going to go into details of malware and so on and so forth, but the bottom line is there's all kinds of ways to basically try to, test the waters, make sure that the cards are good, and then they take them. And who are they going to go? I mean, who are the main targets? Well, with the increase in e-commerce, what happened is a lot of merchants who were not really, didn't have potentially the best defenses because they had, just a small footprint. Suddenly they have so many people who are just, hitting their store. So they geared up the best they could. They also wanted to make it easy for cardholders. And unfortunately, a lot of the smaller and medium, e-commerce retailers are the ones who were the most victims of those, malware attacks. So something else happened. A lot of them, I'm sure most of you have done that. You buy online and you pick up in store. So unfortunately for the merchant, that means the goods goes away. The same day. You buy it, so you're not even going through the AMV defenses, everything else that you have in the store, and the merchandise is out. So that's been a big problem for a lot of people, for a lot of merchants, and unfortunately, a lot of people have benefited from that. So what does that mean in numbers? 40 million cards were exposed in 2020. That's not nothing, but unfortunately for the US, 50% were issued in the US. So just think about that. And what does it mean in terms of increase? It's a 20% increase year on year from 2019. And the demand for those records also increased by 20%. Something else happened in 2020. Kathy, you want to go to the next slide, please? False positives declines. So for those who don't know what that might be, those are purchases made for regular users with a valid payment card, but they're unfortunately rejected. So as we just said, there are a lot of new people that came on board in the digital channels. They were not known to the system. They did not have patterns. They did not have behaviors. A lot of there's all kinds of tools that help recognize, people in terms of things that they're not even aware that they do. But basically, their shopping patterns and even things about, how fast they click on, the mouse and so on and so forth. So suddenly those people are unknown. And unfortunately, in some cases, well, depending on what they're purchasing, depending on so many things, they're declined. So 25% of cardholders who are declined, the first thing they're going to do, they're like, oh, something's wrong with my card. Let me take another card. Why is that bad? That's bad for the issuer because suddenly the card might be from another issuer, so they're losing, things happening, the revenue associated with that. Then some of them might decide to go somewhere else. So suddenly the merchant themselves no longer sees those card holders, they go somewhere else. And then for those who stay, the bottom line is there's a level of discomfort if they go back and their average spend goes down. So all in all, it is not a positive experience. It's bad for everybody. So what does that mean? We need to find a solution that addresses, security, that proves that the credentials are the right credentials and that you are the right card holder, and all that without too much friction. So if you go to the next slide, Kathy, this is the holy grail of security. You need to find this happy medium between the right balance between security and, in this case, let's talk about transaction approvals. So you want to reduce the card not present fraud rate, all the costs associated with that, and you want to increase revenue, and you want happy customers as well as happy merchants. So to talk more about this solution, I'm going to hand this over to Cyril now, who's going to talk to you about the dynamic security code cards. Cyril, it's up to you.
Thank you, Francine. So what is the dynamic code card? Cathy, please, you can have the next slide. Yes, at the beginning on the card, you have a MAC stripe. And this MAC stripe have data that wasn't clear on the MAC stripe and also during the transaction and authorization. Then the EMV chip. The EMV chip brings cryptography, but also authentication, and synchronization between the POS and the authorization platform itself. The first extension of the EMV screen, the first extension of the EMV was the contactless that brings speed and convenience. With dynamic card security code, this new extension will bring the security enhancement of the EMV to the e-commerce. Cathy, if you can have the next one. So what is the dynamic security code card itself? First of all, it's a regular card with a dual interface payment card that is embed a small screen. This screen is what we call a bistable display or electronic paper display. It's exactly the same kind of electronic that you have, or screen that you have on the Kindle. That means that this display need power only to change the state of the display. The security code itself refreshes automatically by a timer or during all all the rest of the specification of the card will stay exactly the same as a standard card that you have today, meaning the embossing, the signature panel, everything stays the same. Can have the next key. So as I mentioned before, you have two types of dynamic security code card. The first one is a time-based solution. So the time-based solution means that in the card you have a battery and you have a clock. And the code will change automatically at the set interval, meaning that the bank at the beginning will choose if they want the code to change every hour, 3 hours, every 12 hours. That will be a decision from sure at the perso level. The other solution, it's a battery-free EMV integrated solution. That means that the code refresh every time you are on a POS or an ATM, and the card will take the power from the POS and the ATM to generate and calculate the next code. During an EMV payment, when the EMV chip will do its functionality for the payment itself, it will calculate the code and push it and push to the display. Of course, this works on all POS and ATM and on contactless. And have the next one, Cathy. So we'll see a small video that will show how a time-based card works. And so, as I said, the code will be refreshed on time, and you will choose the interval that you need for this product. The EMV solution will use the power of the POS and ATM to refresh the code. And on this slide, you will see it's going to be very fast. The code will change every time you do an EMV transaction. So now I will have Oliver I think that, yes, so Oliver will bring all the benefit of the dynamic security code card. Oliver?
Great, thank you, Cyril. Cathy, could you please jump to the next slide? Thank you. So yeah, in this, I'm just going to sort of go over some of the high level benefits. And clearly, you know, what we're all speaking about here today is combating fraud at the source. And so, you know, in any sort of card not present transaction historically, there's been this, everything that I'm sending over the authorization, the primary account number, the expiration date, the security code, all of it is static information. So if that's, you know, gleaned at a restaurant, at a petroleum station, within a database, frankly, it can be reused, and depending on how good the authorization rules are at the issuer or the processor, you know, that may or may not get flagged as a fraudulent transaction, and as Francine said earlier, may in fact impact actual good transactions. And so the more that we think we can introduce dynamic data into the authorization stream, the more it will deter card information theft. So, you know, you can imagine today there are not, you know, a lot of dynamic security code cards in market. But as that number begins to grow and fraudsters find out that what they used to be able to harvest and use is now becoming less and less useful, then frankly they go to some other low-hanging fruit, or hopefully just go away altogether, although I don't think that's a realistic hope. Francine did a great job of discussing the addressing false positives. I kind of think of this as the perfect trifecta. Not only does it improve the issuer's relationship with their consumer. Frankly, if they're better able to make an informed authorization decision, and 10 times out of 10 with the dynamic code, they know this is Oliver's card. They're going to approve this transaction. It's not only good for the issuer, it's frankly also good for the merchant who doesn't want to see that cart abandoned, and frankly good for the consumer, because I may take one of a few actions. I may take out another payment device. I may not make the purchase at all. I may go to another merchant, but ultimately I'll feel that there's friction, and I may not want to use that channel again. So as we can reduce false positives, frankly, everybody in the payment chain benefits. And this final one, and as you can see in parentheses there, it's specific to the EMV integrated, but the actual, if somebody fraudulently tries to harvest that data from, that point of sale, be it a restaurant or be it wherever you may lose control of your card, and then that security code gets entered into the system and they try to use it again later, the pinpoint accuracy will be back to that specific merchant where the compromise took place. So, if you ever talk to a fraud analyst or frankly law enforcement, the real trick to all of this is trying to figure out where compromises occur. And frankly, if it's 10 million accounts taken from a database, that can be honed in on fairly quickly. But if it's a local restaurant or some other type of place that you might have an individual out of, a number of great staff, one of them decides that they're going to try to pick off some cards, you can very, very quickly pinpoint as dynamic cards get used that was the place where the compromise happened, and you can ferret out the bad actor, I think, more quickly than you could have in the past. And so the final bullet point there benefits all cards, including those with static security codes, speaks to that point of, if you can eliminate the point of compromise, then that is good for any type of card, regardless of whether it's dynamic security code or not. And of course, it's the dynamic security code that helps lessen those points of compromise. So you can't have one without the other, but once you have the one, it does in fact positively impact the other. Next slide, please. And the next couple of slides, I think, are quite quick, because it's essentially saying whether consumer or merchant, there's virtually no impact. So, for those old enough remembering, mail order, telephone order type transactions, through to the early days of e-com shopping and entering in, primary account number, expiration date, and security code, or whether you're using your iPad or more recently a mobile phone, the process for a consumer purchase is identical. You look at your card, you pick up that security code on the back of it, and you enter in the 3 or 4 digit code as you always have. The difference now is that code by its name is now dynamic, changes, either on a clock basis or on a transaction basis. And so really, I kind of think of the use case of my mother, who's 81. She could figure this out. She does some e-com transaction shopping now, largely in the past year through necessity, but this would not pose any sort of impediment to her. She's been able to figure it out with a static code. Dynamic code has no new impact to her. Next slide, please. I always like it, when we can talk to our friends in the merchant community and say that there's no impact to them either, because that's a phrase that we don't often get to say, whether it's, secure remote commerce or contactless or EMV chip. You had to change a point of sale, you had to change the firmware, you had to change the software, et cetera. This is very much in the same vein as consumer impact, which is zero. If you support, the entering of a security code today, then it's no different for dynamic. You simply, have that box that pops up, consumer enters it, you pass it in the authorization message as you do today, and no impact. So no, no impact on the merchant side and the acquirer side for implementing this type of technology. Next slide, please. So the issuer advantages, stronger card security. So clearly, again, the goal, reduction of card not present fraud, which then has the spillover effects of lower fraud management costs and less card reissuance. And, I'll speak to less card reissuance is also, I think, a fairly strong consumer benefit, because I believe most consumers, at least on their primary card or their top of wallet card, have a number of pre-authorized payments attached to that. So if you get a card reissued to you, you have to go through that rather annoying, either phone up a company or go on their website and enter in your new card credentials and hope that you're on a secure line so that your credentials don't actually get compromised again. On the revenue increase perspective, clearly, I think there's a set of consumers out there that are looking for a solution to, what we all view as a weak link in security. So there will be consumers that will actively seek out cards that have this. There's also the potential for issuers to say, if my historical annual fee was $100, I could potentially charge $110, $120 for this, because there's an additional feature that's a benefit to the consumer as well. And in fact, there are some instances of trials where it might actually be a monthly service. So you add a dollar per month to the cardholder statement, and that just becomes an ongoing, $12 a year revenue stream for the issuer. And I think there's a couple more points to this. Thank you, Kathy. Market differentiation. Again, this sort of speaks to the consumer that's out there looking for, which issuer has the best protection from my point of view. And I used to argue, hey, would metal cards be a big thing? And the jury was out on that to a certain extent. But clearly, metal cards have gained the affection of consumers. I see this as something, of equal, if not greater importance, where a consumer says, this is actually something that will help me protect my credentials. It will help me from having to re-enter pre-authorized details. And so, the issuer, frankly, has an improved brand image, and the consumer may, in fact, seek out that issuer. And going back to the false positive storyline, which is improve cardholder trust and confidence. If that card works for card present transactions, contact and contactless, if it works for card not present transactions, your authorization rates are 100% and always good. I shouldn't say 100%, but if it really is you using the card and the system shows that, and there's dynamic data that can prove that, then that card, it stands to reason, would have a greater chance of being top of wallet, because it's the card you trust, it's the issuer you trust, it's the brand you trust. At this point, I will kick it over to Jerry from IDEMIA, who will talk about some of the stakeholder considerations along with Tom from Visa. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Oliver. So I will talk about the issuer, personal bureau, and processor considerations, and Tom will talk about the networks. Next slide, Kathy. So issuer considerations mainly involve a lot of decision making. They decide which technology would suit their needs and level of risk tolerance, whether it be time-based or EMB integrated solution. For example, the time-based solution would require decisions on how often the dynamic code changes. So code changing of a few minutes may appear very secure, but come at the expense of battery life. So a 4-hour refresh rate, as suggested by Visa, would be a balance of security and battery longevity. That would allow the card to last up to the normal card life cycle. Next, the issuer would make decisions on how the validation of the dynamic code would take place. Will this be an in-house development of the software from scratch, or will it be leveraging off-the-shelf software? Or for the quickest path, will the issuer be utilizing on-behalf services to validate the dynamic security code, much like during the US EMV migration when no processor was ready to process the chip cryptogram at that time. Lastly, for the time-based solution, the issuer may need to consider proper card and battery disposal at the card's end of life. Local, state, and federal laws may apply regarding recycling and disposal, just like regular consumer electronics such as tablets and cell phones. Now let me talk about the EMV integrated solutions. The issuer should have a strategy on educating cardholders about card usage. Code changes rely on the cardholder performing card present transactions, since the card draws power from the terminal and not from an internal battery. So the security code would not change if the cardholder does not perform a card present transaction. The issuer will then have to encourage cardholders to use the card at a POS or ATM if inactivity is detected, especially if they're staying home a lot. Next slide, please. So I will be talking about the Perso Bureau considerations. Perso bureaus are responsible for card personalization and getting the cards to the hands of the cardholders. For dynamic security code, the role of the Perso Bureau remains the same. Chip personalization in an EMV integrated solution remains the same as traditional EMV cards. The Perso script is written for the same chip that drives both EMV payment application and the display. So prior to shipping the cards, quality inspection needs to occur to ensure that the display code changes and does not stick to the same static number. This can be accomplished by automatically by adding a camera that checks the number changing during the chip personalization process. Now, let me switch over to the time-based solution. For the time-based, there is a battery, so there is an optimal time period when personalization would need to happen, just like off-the-shelf batteries you buy at the store. Best before date indicates they should not be stored indefinitely to max out battery life. The same is true for the time-based solution that contains a battery. It is recommended that cards be personalized within about a 6-month period from the date of manufacturing. Another consideration for the Perso Bureau is the addition of a contactless module that may be needed to be added to the Perso machine to personalize the separate chip that is driving the display. A script to Perso the chip display will need to be alongside with a script to Perso the EMV payment application. Very important consideration for a time-based solution is an accurate time server, and that is UTC synchronized. This sets the internal clock inside the card that drives the refresh rate, just like time-based one-time password tokens used for logging into a VPN. As for scrap cards, they happen whether they, it'd be a jam on a Perso machine or just glitches in the Perso software. Any scraps, how small they may be, should be disposed of properly in accordance to local, state, and federal laws. Quality inspection, checking would require waiting for a dynamic code to refresh prior to sending the cards out to ensure that the code isn't frozen. Also, for check with the manufacturer for suggestions on any special packaging. Besides offering protection during transport, the issuer may opt for packaging that convey value and exclusivity to high value cardholders. While many issuers achieve this with metal cards today, those wanting to differentiate themselves, just like Oliver mentioned, may opt for issuing dynamic security code cards. So that therefore the Perso Bureau needs to ensure that special packaging can be accommodated for at the Perso Bureau. Lastly, whether it's time-based or EMV integrated, the Perso Bureau needs to ensure the personalized card go through the payment network's certification process, complete with letter of approval, just like traditional EMV cards. Next slide, please. So processors end up as the integration of decisions and actions at the made at the issuer and the Perso Bureau level. This slide is just a brief review of the two solutions and what the processor needs to account for each. So the processor needs to implement proper validation of the dynamic code depending on the solution chosen, whether it's time-based or EMV integrated. That means that the time-based solution, as mentioned earlier, an accurate time server clock is needed so that the proper refresh rate can be accounted for in the calculation, whether that's from a few minutes or a few hours. Also, the processor needs to account for the algorithm of each solution, whether it's a Visa dynamic CVV algorithm, an open authentication algorithm in the case of the time-based solution. For EMV integrated, a standard algorithm for static CVV algorithm or contactless MAC-drive CVVs may be used. Next, the processor needs to determine how to implement the validation server, whether this would be in-house development, off the shelf, or on behalf of service provided by the payment network. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we show the transaction flow at the host level. We show the transaction flow on a time-based solution from merchant website all the way to the issuer host, where the card is identified by its PAN or BIN range, whether the card has static or dynamic security code. In a static CVV situation, only the left and middle portion would be valid. So the issuer can issue its own approval after the code is sent from the merchant to the issuer server. And the issuer server could have its own approval or denial and return the decision back to the merchant website. If it's identified as a dynamic security code, the processor would forward the dynamic code to a separate validation server, which would have its own HSM and UTC synchronized time server to validate the code. Again, this validation server could be hosted in-house or in-house development or an off-the-shelf software. But now if the issuer just wants to do a quick try of the dynamic code cards without much development at the processor can use an on behalf of validation service provided by a payment network such as Visa has done. In this case, the payment network validates the dynamic code and returns to the issuer host what would have been a static CVV for that card. So the transaction would then appear like a normal static CVV transaction to the processor that can be validated normally. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I'm showing for the EMV integrated solution, a transaction flow, just like in the time-based solution, the card is identified based on PAN or BIN range, whether security code is static or dynamic. And with in-house development, the transaction can be routed using existing infrastructure. One path that leads to a normal static CVV calculation using the existing HSM, or another path that incorporates the transaction count in the CVV calculation if the security code is dynamic. In either case, the decision to approve or deny the transaction comes from the existing infrastructure, which replaces the static CVV calculation with a dynamic one. For next slide would be for Tom. I'll turn it over to him.
Thanks very much, Jerry. Speaking of the implementation considerations from a network perspective, regardless of whether the solution that is being used is the time-based solution or the EMV integrated solution, you would need to make sure that the CVV2 checking, the static CVV2 checking was disabled at the network, obviously, so that declines aren't based on what the network is using. For the time-based solution, obviously the network and the card must be in sync. So you need to make sure that the card is personalized and the network host is synchronized to have that same amount of time. For keys that are used with at least with the solution for us is it needs a new key that needs to be used. It can't be used. It cannot use the same key that's used for chip card transactions. And there are things like deferred authentication and things to be considered, such as the code changing in flight to take into consideration. So you may want to, or you would need to make sure that more than one code is valid at the same time, so that it can take care of the in-flight transactions. But beyond that, for the EMV integrated solution, there would be no changes necessary at the network, other than, again, disabling the static security code checking. So fairly straightforward. And with that, I will pass it to Cyril for the conclusions.
Thank you, Tom. Kathy, can I have the next slide, please? So in the conclusion, obviously, we can say that a dynamic card security code are more secure than a static data. And we are securing the card at the source, and it's an issuer-centric solution. That means that the issuer will be the only the one that will launch the product, and will not involve, as we could see before, any change on the full payment ecosystem. It's totally transparent for the cardholder, and it's a robust additional security layer for all the existing security solution like TrueSecure or other solutions that are on the market already. I will say that after what Francine, Oliver, Jerry, and Tom just presented, I am convinced that this is the right time for the issuer to launch the dynamic card security code solution. This solution brings the missing security layers and effectively bring the security enhancement of the EMV to the e-commerce by refreshing the card data instead of having the same static code during the entire lifetime of the card. So now I will say, Jason, I think that you will continue now with the Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Cyril, as we do have a number of questions. As I'm going to go ahead, I think we've still got about 15 minutes or so left. I'm going to start with the questions that came in through our Q&A box through WebEx. But this first one, I think, is an easy one. Cyril, I'm going to ask you this one, but does the dynamic security code card meet ISO standards for card thickness?
Yes, totally. The card and its standard has to go to the ISO 7810 and 11 and 16. Okay.
Thank you for that. This next question, again from Jason Hall, is I'm going to direct this one, I think, to either Jerry or Tom. I think we covered a little bit of this, but with a timer-based dynamic service code, would the processor be set to support the current and last code, say if the code changed between when the customer entered the code and the payment was accepted?
I could
Yeah,
answer that. Oh, go ahead.
oh.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think I covered that in my slide, although not very well. But yeah, the way that that our service works is that we require at least one code to be valid, one previous code to be valid for just such situations, and we allow up to 11 previous codes to be valid for just that situation, either the code changing as the transaction is in flight, or if you have merchants that say do deferred authorizations and batch them up and send in authorizations at the end of the day or the following morning. So we do have that taken into account.
Yeah, the same is true for an off-the-shelf software provided by Demia. This is configurable, how much forwards and backwards can be valid.
Okay, very good. Thank you, guys. I'm going to jump down as we've got a question from Colombo Fasano. What is the price difference between a standard card and a dynamic card? And I'll direct that one to Francine.
That's a tough question, actually. I mean, it is more expensive. It depends on technologies. And at the end of the day, issuers need to do kind of the math in terms of, their fraud versus, the cost of their fraud, total cost of fraud versus increasing, putting a card at a different price. And I believe it was Oliver who also explained that in the implementations that we've seen today, a lot of issuers have decided to actually charge for it because it's a premium product. And there's no reason to give a premium product, for free. Security is something that is, relevant. And so by doing it, whether it's on a monthly, and it doesn't have to be anything huge, you can just cover the cost of the card. Because today, just think about it. If you have to immediately replace a card, just add the shipping cost, the cost of the card, the exceptions, and so on and so forth. We're talking, just to replace a card, we're talking 2-digit, numbers. So the cost of the card, in that respect, let's put it this way: it's not as expensive as a metal card, and it is more expensive than a regular dual interface EMV card. But it is more expensive by any doubt.
Okay, thank you, Francine. This next one is I'll go back to Cyril for this one, but are you expecting cards where you envision combining dynamic CVV and biometric capability like fingerprint sensors in one card?
Yes, totally. Of course, on the development and R&D, we are all thinking about that. But at the same time, as Francine just mentioned, the price is important as well. And we need to be careful about not having a too expensive card to, if we want to have a mass market for this product.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I
jump in.
Sorry, Jason. I just wanted to add on to that. Maybe ideally the perfect card is a metal card with dynamic security code and a biometric sensor on it. Not only would that be ultra cool and kill all sorts of fraud out there. The real trick, and back when I used to work at MasterCard and Visa, I didn't have an appreciation for sort of the entire supply chain, but you also want to make sure that those contactless transactions remain fairly quick. And particularly on the biometric sensor side of things, the more you can sort of combine not just the EMV chip, but also the MCU, and then just have a separate sensor, the faster those transactions are. So we're just sort of getting to that sweet spot of the chip technology now, where those things can be combined. And as you combine them, you get a little bit better price point, but you also get the if you go to the MTA and you want the turnstile to open quickly, you need to still have those fast transactions. So I would have argued 5 years ago from a chip perspective, very difficult to do the sorts of things like combining dynamic security code and biometric sensor, but we're getting to the point where that is absolutely feasible now.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Continue to get some more questions in through the Q&A box. This one is from Nicholas. It says, how are consecutive offline payments managed? Is the same CVV allowed for several transactions while not being inserted into an NFC field? And I'm going to give that one back to Jerry, if you could help out on that question.
So for the for the I believe the question was for a static, well, could be both actually, but for a time-based, it is valid up to the next refresh rate. And the same is true for the static, I mean, the EMV integrated one. But that one will, the code will be valid up to the next time that the cardholder does the refresh in a POS or ATM terminal.
Yeah, I would say that with the time-based solution, let's say that the card is configured to change every 4 hours. If more than one card not present transaction is done within those 4 hours, then those multiple transactions would use the same code. And I believe that is the same with the EMV integrated solution. If you haven't gone to a point of sale terminal and done a contact or contactless chip transaction, which caused the refresh to happen, then yes, you would have multiple transactions that have the same code. So it's not one-time use. It's time-based or it's event-based.
Okay, yeah, thank you guys for that. Is another question that came in through the chat box. Probably same group of individuals for this one, but it says, what happens where the pre-auth and the evaluated authorization is several days apart? My company does not request the valuation authorization. Oops, just lost the question. The valuation authorization until just prior to the shipment, which means the delay varies from minutes to weeks. I don't know, Tom, if you want to maybe take a stab at that one.
Yeah, it would depend on how the issuer has configured their the account to behave in that manner. However, I would think that if it's weeks, then it's probably not going to work. There, at the max, the way that at least our system is set up is, I think we can have the same code be valid. Well, it's only valid for 18 hours, and then you're talking about the previous 11 codes being possible. So that's, 190 so hours or something that a code could be considered valid. So if you're talking about 2 weeks later, then the CVV2, the DCVV2 that you would use on that transaction would not be valid. So I think that at that point you're probably out of luck with respect to being that far apart.
Yeah, and on the EMV integrated solution, it's a little bit different because this will follow the EMV rules, meaning that the offline payment for an EMV card is a maximum 5 transactions before the reader is forced to go online to accept the transaction. And it's exactly what's going to happen for an EMV integrated code, where if the code is there for the last 5 codes was used during 5 transactions, then I agree with Tom, the payment will be rejected. If it's the code is still there, then the payment will be accepted. But this system will follow the EMV rules.
Okay. Very good. As I know that there are some questions here relative to growth rate, is Francine, I'm going to come back to you on this one as it says, can you quantify the market take-up and growth rate of dynamic CVV? What are the projections of future adoption, and where is dynamic CVV most popular?
So I wish I had a crystal ball to answer where it's going to happen and how fast. That being said, right now there's good success in many countries except the US. And that's kind of interesting in terms of today. I'm talking about, we have large deployments in Europe, we have some in Asia. The US, I think, is different for so many reasons. First, it's one of the largest country when it comes to e-commerce, number one, which seems counterintuitive, but that means there's a lot of things that need to happen. And I think the fact that they also migrated to EMV later, the focus was somewhere else. And it was not that it was ignored. I mean, I think a lot of people were very much well aware of you implement EMV and therefore fraud is going to go to the weakest link, which is the card not present, the e-commerce environment. That being said, I think COVID has, changed a lot of things from supply chain to channels to behaviors. So I think this could be a good opportunity. There might be a renewed interest in looking into that, in addition to all the other solutions that already exist, as Cyril mentioned. This is not a replace it. This is an add-on that really addresses, other issues that the other solutions don't. So I cannot quantify. I do not have any numbers for that, but I know there's been some uptakes in other countries, some new deployments, and I think they were made public. If you go on websites, I mean, you can find all that. Everything that's been out there is public information.
Another, yeah,
Jason,
another
if
thing.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jerry. I will go after. Go ahead.
Okay, just wanted to specify the US did have some pilots, but was interrupted with COVID. So a lot of the effort right now by a lot of the issuers are mainly focused on the BAU processes to resolve, to continue the business, and so that that has placed some of these activities of getting a new product out delayed. So that's one consideration why it's it's slowed down for now.
The 2 points that it's also important is that until now there were few card manufacturers that were able to propose a dynamic card security code, but now they are almost all the card manufacturers now are able to manufacture this card and to propose this card to their banks. And also the second point is that the price of the card itself is going down, and now it starts to enter an ROI that it's clear for the bank, and now bring this solution feasible and with a good return.
Okay. Yeah, thank you guys for all of that. Is a very valid question there. I've got one from Tom too. I'm going to go back. If you can shed some light, we got a question. Can you explain how dynamic security code cards coexist or compete with other card not present initiatives like SRC or 3DS?
Yeah, I would say that first off, at least from speaking from the Visa perspective, SRC and 3D Secure are certainly more robust solutions when it comes to protecting card not present transactions. But with dynamic CVV2, it's something that's fairly comparatively easy for an issuer to implement, in that the entire operation and implementation is controlled by the issuer, whereas with the SRC and 3D Secure, that takes and is getting the buy-in from the entire industry. But this is something that an issuer can do comparatively quicker and easier than those. We don't certainly at Visa see Dynamics CVV2 as a replacement or a substitute for SRC or 3D Secure. It's more something that's a complement, and we actually, we're looking at ways that we can use Dynamics CVV2, our solution, as part of our 3D Secure and SRC offering. So we certainly see it as complementary rather than something that should be considered a substitute.
No, that's good. It sounds like more of a layered approach.
Right.
That's good. Yep. Thank you. Probably time for another question or two. Cyril, I'm going to ask you this one, but with the time-based card, is the battery the most expensive component in the card?
It's one of the most, for sure, but yes, the battery is the most expensive, and probably all the clock system as well it's quite expensive. Yes.
Okay. Follow-up question too, relative to opportunities in the market. And Francine, I'll probably come back to you for this one, but are you aware of any pilots being done today that have been publicized by issuers here within the US?
Most often, some pilots are not public. There are some that were public, I believe, in terms of in that they had to reach out to card holders. And I have friends who told me, hey, we got your card through, Bank X. And so I would encourage, without, just to be on the safe side, I would encourage people to do a search on their browser and they'll find immediately, those that were made public. At this point in time, I'm not 100% positive which ones made, clear announcements to that effect in the US.
Okay. Very good. Thank you guys. As our time is up this afternoon, there's a couple other questions. We'll be sure to get back to those of you who submitted questions. Just as a quick note, is the webinar will be posted to the Secure Technology Alliance website, right? So if you have any questions related to the content that was presented or anything that's popped up even subsequently, please feel free to reach out. But that content will be on the STA website. There will be a reference to this webinar specifically. Additional content can be found at the EMV Connection website, as well as the Mobile Driver's License website, as well as the U.S. Payments Form website, right? So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Next slide. Maybe, yeah, just as a recap, you've got the contact information for each of the panelists. We also know how to get a hold of them. So if you have any questions, even after we get done here, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Kathy Meditz, and we'll be happy to connect you with the appropriate resource from the panel. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I think a very informative session. Thank you to all of the panelists who contributed time and developed the content for the presentation, and also all of the attendees, as it looks like it was a strongly attended event. So thank you guys. Have a good afternoon.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.